the campus of the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. The Utah Debate Commission welcomes you to the 4th Congressional District Candidates Debate.
Good evening. I'm Ken Verdoya, and welcome to the studios of KUED TV on the campus of the University of Utah for one of the most highly anticipated exchanges sponsored by the Utah Debate Commission during this 2014 election season. Tonight we gather for a debate between candidates in Utah's 4th Congressional District. The seat is open with the retirement of Representative Jim Matheson. Tonight we will hear from the Republican candidate, Mia Love, and the Democratic candidate, Doug Owens. Each candidate receives a 2-minute opportunity for an opening statement. And prior to airtime, it was determined Doug Owens would have the first opportunity. Mr. Owens.
Thank you, Ken, and thanks to the Debate Commission, and thanks to my opponent. It's nice to be here on the University of Utah campus where I went to school. I am Doug Owens. I am a proud father of 4, married to my wife Cynthia Owens of 26 years. She's got the whole gang here in the room tonight. I am a 6th-generation Utahn, and I have been a business defense attorney for my entire professional career. I have some years ago when our boys were 5, 3, and 1, I took 2 years off to stay home with them while my wife finished a residency in pediatrics. Put my own career on hold to do that. I love Utah. I love the history. I love the people and the geography, and I want to make a difference for all of us. The most important issues that I want to work on in this campaign, and I think the campaign needs to focus on, are helping hardworking middle-class families who are being squeezed like never before, helping to improve the quality of life for all people here in Utah, and getting Congress back to work again on common sense solutions that we all need to the problems facing us. Utah deserves a representative who will go to Washington and remember where they come from and who they represent, not somebody who will go and represent another ideology or just vote a party line. I'll go to Washington and work across the aisle and take any good idea I find it, no matter what the party. Our country needs nothing less than the best that the Democrats and the Republicans have to offer. And I will be a strong and independent voice for Utah. My Utah roots run deep, and I will always put the needs of Utah families first as I think about those issues that come up in Washington.
And now a 2-minute opening statement opportunity for Mia Love.
Thank you so much, Ken Verdoya, for doing this. I'd like to thank the Utah Debate Commission, the University of Utah. I'd also like to thank my opponent for being here today also. And I'd like to thank all of the Utahns that are here tonight and that are watching. I am the daughter of parents who immigrated to the United States legally with $10 in their pockets and the hope that the America they'd heard about really did exist. My parents taught me the value of hard work, education, personal responsibility, and fiscal discipline. I've taken all of those principles and I've applied them both in the private sector and in the public sector, which I've worked. As a mayor and as a city council member, we've balanced budgets every year. Before making any new commitments, we asked ourselves, is it affordable? Is it sustainable? And is it our job? Today, Saratoga Springs holds the highest bond rating available to it. Washington can take a lesson from that. For me, this is not about moving to Washington. It's about moving Washington towards the principles we live by here in Utah. So rather than focusing on what happens in D.C. boardrooms and back rooms, I want to focus on what's happening in your living rooms, especially at the kitchen table. When I ponder the difficulties facing our nation, I don't just see dollar signs, debt, and deficits. I see my 3 children who will look at me and ask, how did we let this happen? Well, we're Utahns. We're not going to let this happen. I promised you that I would run a positive, issues-oriented campaign and conduct myself in a way that is worthy of your support and your votes. I want you to know that you're going to see a contrast tonight. And what you're going to see is I'm cutting through the clutter of D.C. politics as usual, ending the dysfunction and the divisiveness, while representing your values, finding solutions, and attacking problems, not people. Thank you.
The Utah Debate Commission has established a format that allows each candidate 90 seconds for an initial reply to a question. There will be rebuttal time as well. These questions were drawn from voter input to the Debate Commission's website. Let's go to question number 1. Mia Love, you'll have the first 90-second opportunity. At least one media outlet has identified educational views as a continental divide between your candidacies. What do you view as the proper role of the federal government in public education? And Robert of Salt Lake City asks, do you oppose or favor National Common Core standards? 90-second opportunity.
Well, I want you to know that as a parent of 3 children in public schools, education is important to me. That's why I trust Utah parents and Utah teachers to do what's best for Utah students. Now, a lot of our funding is going into Washington bureaucrats, and too little of our funding is going into our classrooms. And what we need to do is get that decision-making back into our classrooms and back to our states. We need to eliminate the disparities between the salaries of the Department of Education and the salaries of our teachers. We need to oppose those one-size-fits-all programs that binds the hands of our talented, innovative teachers. And we need to make sure that we are getting as much local control of schools as possible. I want standards. I want high standards, but I want Utah to be able to control them, tweak them, change them, make them better without feeling like we're being blackmailed with our own taxpayer dollars.
Mr. Owens, you have a 90-second opportunity to respond on the fundamental role of the federal government in public education.
Well, we can all agree that education is the most important investment we can make in our future and the path forward for our children. I want to make sure that our children are equipped to compete in a global economy. That's the best way we can help hardworking middle-class families better take care of themselves and help educate their children for the future. You know, I'm not satisfied that Utah is dead last in terms of per pupil expenditures, and I've got an opponent who will make that worse by eliminating the Department of Education and the 12% of Utah funding for Utah schools that comes from national sources. I'm not satisfied that I meet all the time on the campaign trail young people who are deciding not to go to college because they're afraid they won't be able to pay back their student loans when they get out. I'm not satisfied that if you are from an advantaged economic background, you are 4 times more likely to go on and get a higher ed degree than if you're from a disadvantaged background. We can do better than that. Education is an important Utah value. My mother was a teacher. My great-grandfather, the first teacher in Panguitch history. Frankly, my opponent's views on this issue are quite extreme. They do not come from Utah. They come from some other place and, frankly, some other era. The business today is demanding that we educate our children so that they can be driving forces in the global economy. I want to make sure we do that for Utah.
You're both leaving time on the clock, and yet you're both also leaving unaddressed the specific question of Robert of Salt Lake City. Oppose or favor National Common Core standards? I want you each to take 30 seconds to speak right to Common Core standards.
I oppose Common Core because I believe that we are being blackmailed with our own taxpayer dollars. Utah parents and Utah teachers should be able to have the decision making when it comes to Utah students.
Mr. Owens, your time on Common Core.
I strongly believe and favor local control of our curriculum. We know how to educate our children here in Utah. It's a fact question whether or not No Child Left Behind is a national standard or a state standard. The Attorney General recently reported the results of his investigation and found that it was a locally agreed to standard, not a federally imposed standard. So I do not oppose the Common Core, although if I were to determine factually that it was a federally imposed standard, I would be opposed to that. I think here in Utah, we can educate our own children.
Our next question takes us to the realm of foreign policy. It's a virtual certainty. Mr. Owens, you'll have the first 90-second opportunity to respond. Virtual certainty that the new Congress in January will find itself dealing with continuing threats posed by forces of the Islamic State, variously referred to as ISIS or ISIL. Already there are misgivings about the effectiveness of an air campaign to control ISIS territorial ambitions. If seated in the next Congress, what are the criteria you will need to support adding ground troops to our U.S. and allied strategy?
We need to make sure that our borders are safe and that we are safe from terrorist threats. ISIS represents a new threat on the planet, a terrorist organization that has control of the apparatus of government, that has control of territory, that has control of petrodollar income. We need to make sure that we address that. I watch it carefully. I hope that the plans with airstrikes will be sufficient and that another ground war will not be necessary. I would take that decision extremely seriously. I would listen to military advisors and others who are more expert than I am. But I would be cautious with American life, of course. I think we owe it to our vets. I want to thank them for putting themselves in harm's way in the last two wars that we're just trying to extricate ourselves from. I want to make sure we have the resources to take care of those veterans. So I would watch it carefully and listen to the experts and make a careful judgment about it, Ken.
Mia Love, your response on the subject of military use in response to ISIS.
Thank you. Understand that when we're dealing with terrorist groups, we're dealing with people who do not value human life the way we do. They've shown that they're willing to hurt their own women and children for what they believe is a greater cause. And understand that when we are sending our men and women in uniform in harm's way, we are sending our neighbors, we're sending our family members. So several things, specifically what you asked, several things have to happen before we take military action. Number one, we need to make sure that it's approved by Congress, not by just a president. Number two, we need to make sure that there's a clear American threat, a threat to American lives. Number three, we need to make sure that we have a clear objective, a mission. And number four, a way out. I have to tell you, I go to a lot of these events with the Gold Star moms and people like Jamie Towse. I need to be able to look her in the eye and say that your son Cody did not die in vain, that he went in for the right reasons, and he will never be forgotten. We owe a great deal of gratitude and respect to those men and women in uniform. They have sacrificed quite a bit. We'll never be able to give them back what they've sacrificed. And we certainly owe a great deal of gratitude to the families of those who did not come home. I want to say thank you for your service.
Rebuttal time. Mr. Owens, you have the first opportunity.
You know, I think this is the Middle East, and the situation there is going to be one of the most significant that we face in our era. We've got to figure out how to make peace with the core issue, which is the disputes between Israel and Palestinians. There's an opening I see for an avenue to make peace, to help foster peace. It's going to be up to, of course, the Israelis and the Palestinians primarily. But the United States can foster peace, can do some things on the sidelines to help that. One thing I want to do is help with humanitarian reconstruction in Gaza, rather, and make sure that when there are adequate controls in place to make sure that those construction materials aren't diverted into war-making processes as they were in the past. We saw with the way the tunnels were built that construction materials had been diverted into that use. So I think that as a member of Congress, we can make sure that when humanitarian aid is voted to Gaza, that very stringent requirements are put in place to make sure that those resources are not diverted. And I think that can help be an opening to get rid of Hamas and get a better government there that will be more likely and willing to make peace with Israel.
I am not a very essential member of this exchange tonight, but one thing they have charged me with is keeping an eye on the clock, and I admonish both candidates to do the same. Mia Love, you have a 1-minute opportunity now to speak to the subject as broadly defined now by Mr. Owens to include Middle East peace.
Well, first of all, I think that what we need is certainly better leadership in the White House. It's hard to flex your muscles when you haven't worked out. It's hard to continue to draw lines in the sand when you haven't shown that you can actually be strong with the first line that you've drawn. I think that it's important to have a strong national defense. And national defense doesn't just help us in times of war, it actually helps us prevent war. And I think that that's what we need to focus on, making sure that we are strong.
Mia Love, you will have the first opportunity to respond to this question. You both alluded to it in one fashion or another in your opening statement. The partisan gridlock problem in Washington is obvious to any observer. There are differing opinions on how best to move forward to get things done in the new year. Last year, the political differences led to a government shutdown. Would you have supported the government shutdown? Yes or no, the questioner asks. Why or why not? You have the first 90-second opportunity.
I'm going to be very clear about this. I would not have supported the government shutdown. What I do support is defunding Obamacare. I think a great indicator of what someone's going to do in the future is what they've done in the past. In Saratoga Springs, we didn't run around with R's and D's stamped on our foreheads. When we had tough things to deal with, we had to deal with them, and we had to have collaborative efforts to deal with them. We balanced our budgets every year. We made sure that Saratoga Springs has the highest bond rating available to a city of its class. And I couldn't do this on my own. I want you to know that one of the things that we do that Washington doesn't do is live by the policies that we create. So I'm going to make two promises right now in terms of ending the dysfunction. One is I think that as a member of Congress, we should live by the policies that we make. I will oppose any special exemptions from the law for members of Congress. Number two, I will get the decision making as close to people as possible. When you get the decision making close to people, you see party lines go away. I think that Washington can learn a lesson from what we've done in Saratoga Springs. Every member of Congress should ask themselves, is it affordable? Is it sustainable? And is it the job of government before making any new decisions?
Mr. Owens, your opportunity to respond to the subject of gridlock.
You know, I would have opposed the shutdown, and I think that was really a breakdown. I have personally discussed this situation with business owners, hotel owners near national parks that were shut down, lost tens of thousands of dollars in booking fees. That was a $40 million hit to the Utah tourism industry. I have personally discussed this issue with seniors, some with tears in their eyes telling me they were concerned about not getting their Social Security checks that was their sole means of livelihood. I believe it was a breakdown and politics at its worst. We're on record. We're on the road to have the least effective session of Congress in the history of the Republic. You know, I would look to my father's example. My dad was a man named Wayne Owens, who was a member of Congress from Utah. He worked across party lines to get things done for Utah. He worked with Orrin Hatch to pass down Winder's legislation to benefit those injured by above-ground nuclear testing. He worked with Jake Garn to fund the Central Utah Project Completion Act, which, if you turn on a tap in Salt Lake County or Utah County, 1/3 of that water today comes from a bipartisan friendship between Wayne Owens and Jake Garn. So it can yield tangible benefits for Utah. We need to move this country forward based on common sense, bipartisan solutions, rather than going to Washington just to vote a party line.
Rebuttal opportunity for you, Mia Love.
I would just like to say that I, too, appreciate the work that Jake Garn has done. He's actually endorsed me in this campaign, and I'm happy to have that endorsement. I've actually worked with quite a few of the mayors in the past, and I've gotten the majority of their endorsement also, along with state legislators, county commissioners. We have done some great work in the state of Utah, and my job is to make sure that I represent you to Washington and not the other way around.
Doug Owens, your 30-second opportunity.
There are so many important issues now. Social Security, reform of Social Security so it stays in place for our seniors, reforming immigration, energy policy. We have got to take the governance seriously. Congress needs to again become the deliberative body of our government. I have a native instinct as an attorney to help people dig into details, to find common ground, to reach compromise. I think if you look at our records, you'll see a distinct difference between the two candidates on our ability to work across party lines to get things done. I will put Utah first, think about those hardworking middle-class families, and will not go to Washington just to vote a party line.
Mr. Owens, you have the first opportunity to respond to this next question, which comes from Michael in South Jordan. It comes from a small business owner who maintains that government regulation is a significant challenge for his business and the overall health of our economy. And he asks each of you, have you learned of a regulatory burden currently placed on businesses that you would like to see changed or repealed? What would you do to help small business owners like me make it in this economy?
That is a great question. I have been a business defense attorney for 25 years. I have made a living in part because business gets hit with regulation that you can see why somebody thought in Washington that might have been a good idea, but by the time it hits the back of a business here, it causes unnecessary consternation, waste of money, and doesn't really fulfill the point that it was launched for. I believe in the free market. I believe it's been the greatest engine in the history of the world for lifting people out of poverty. I would have a great sense of humility as a legislator in Washington in terms of when I would feel it appropriate to interfere with the free market. I strongly believe in education as the way to help people be full-fledged participants in the free market. So I do encounter this situation with businesses who have met regulation. You know, Dodd-Frank, for example, calls for the writing of over 150 regulatory rules. Only half of them have been written. I have personally talked to bank presidents a bank president who said it is ruining his business with extra expense. I think that needs simplification. You got parts of Dodd-Frank coming out of the Department of Labor and the Securities and Exchange Commission that are conflicting with each other, that apply to brokers. I want to go to work. Business is entitled to a predictable, sensible platform, and I would strive to give that to them. I think Congress, if it can get its act together on any number of fronts, would give business a stable platform to work on, and that would be a great benefit to our economy.
Mia Love, your opportunity to speak to that business owner.
Thank you. We see some improvement in the economy, but I can tell you right now that it's not because of Washington. It's in spite of Washington. Our paychecks aren't keeping pace with the rate of inflation. When we go into the stores, we see that the packages are getting smaller. The prices are getting prices are going up. When we go to the gas station, we realize that that dial just won't stop turning when we're putting gas in our car. We need to do everything we can to make sure that businesses can thrive in the United States. And again, particularly what you asked about what we can do is lower the unnecessary regulation that's killing jobs. We need to, when it comes to roads, there's project labor agreements, Davis-Bacon laws, Buy American laws that make the cost of building roads that much more expensive. We need to make sure that we lower the federal corporate tax, the business tax, which is 35%. It's 14 percentage points higher than any industrialized nation in the world. We can do a better job. As you can see, Burger King moving to Canada, AstraZeneca and Pfizer moving over to Europe. We can do a better job. We need to make sure that we instill confidence back into the American economy, grow our economy, and we do a much better job with businesses that way.
Mr. Owens, your opportunity for rebuttal.
Well, some additional reform that's needed is on Obamacare. I have also talked to businesses that have, two businesses have told me they reduced their employees' hours to 30 hours a week in order to not have to buy that insurance. I strongly believe in decoupling the provision of health insurance from employment. We've got to be able to employ our people. We're the only Western country that still does that. I'd like to see that change. There are a host of other problems with the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare, that I would like to fix.
And I'm sorry, I do have to indicate time on that. Mia Love, your 30-second opportunity.
Well, that's an area where we agree. I actually would like to repeal Obamacare, but more importantly than repealing Obamacare, we need to know exactly what we're going to replace it with. I think that we need to replace it with broad free market reforms, put the decision-making back into the hands of people. Again, we need to make sure that we are supporting pro-growth ideas that give everyone opportunities to achieve the American dream if they're willing to work for it.
I promise affordable care in the second half of our exchange. We'll be coming around again.
There's a lot to talk about there.
I have an interesting question that came from Lincoln of Salt Lake City. The Children's Health Insurance Program, better known as CHIP, has contributed to reducing the number of uninsured children in Utah and in the nation. Funding for the program ends in 2015 and faces reauthorization by Congress. Do you support CHIP and its reauthorization? Why or why not? And Mia Love, you have the first 90-second opportunity.
I do believe that we have an obligation to care for those, especially our children, who cannot care for themselves. Our own governor has actually stated that if you give us half the regulation with half the funding, we would be able to do double as much. And again, this is an area where we see healthcare reforms has presented too much of an expense. That was so much so that we needed the Supreme Court to come in and intervene because the federal government was force-feeding our states with Medicare, with Medicaid, and some of the CHIP programs. What we need to do is we need to allow the states to get those levers back. I believe that the people that can do a great job with providing for our children lies right there in our state legislators and right there in our governor. And so I would love to support them in making sure that they make the best decisions possible for our children.
So can you give me that clarification on the reauthorization, aye or nay from your standpoint?
I would say aye, but give more of the decision-making to the states, yes.
Doug Owens, your opportunity to respond.
I would say yes on the reauthorization of CHIP. There are a lot of needy kids out there. My wife is a pediatrician. We talk about health policy over dinner. There are a lot of needy kids out there who need that coverage. My understanding is there is a bit of a loophole. There's a gap in coverage for families who are receiving CHIP already. There's a bill pending in Congress to fix that gap and reauthorize CHIP. I support that. You know, Congress, again, needs to work on common sense bipartisan solutions and not get hung up because Harry Reid's mad at something Mitch McConnell did and Mitch McConnell's mad at something Harry Reid did. We've got to realize elections end. People need to roll up their sleeves and go to work together to get things done, especially for the hardworking middle-class families that I think are increasingly pressed. On health policy, let me just expand. I got a couple more seconds, Ken. I would say that I wish Utah had simply taken the Medicaid expansion. You know, we are losing $800,000 a day in health insurance that would be paid out to benefit Utahns who are economically disadvantaged. I'd like to see that come back to Utah. We paid that in taxes. Having said that, if the governor's not going to accept that and the legislature won't accept that, I'll go to work in Washington to make sure that the governor's Healthy Utah initiative gets passed through Congress. I can support that initiative.
Rebuttal opportunity. Any further comment, Mia Love, on the subject of public health care, child health care, and the CHIP program?
Well, we talked about the CHIP program. We talked about making sure that we get the levers back to the state. Again, I know the legislators personally. I know our governor. We voted them in, and we can do a good job. We can make sure that we give them the levers so that they can specifically take care of our kids in Utah.
Doug Owens, your 30-second opportunity.
I don't have any further comment on CHIP, Ken, but happy to wax on about health policy if anybody's interested.
Again, I promised a return to this theme in the second half.
All right.
As we near the midpoint of our time tonight, I want to welcome you once again to this live debate between candidates for the 4th Congressional District. We are in the studios of KUED on the campus of the University of Utah in Salt Lake City. This is the final debate in a landmark effort in voter information, with media joining together with the citizen-based initiative to provide statewide debate coverage for Utah's federal and statewide offices. Tonight's questions are drawn from those submitted to the Utah Debate Commission at their website, and that is utahdebatecommission.org. We encourage you to visit the site to learn more about the commission and to view the 4 previous debates presented in this unique collaboration. We also invite your comments and feedback on this inaugural season of the Utah Debate Commission. And let's go back to our exchange. So many of the questions that came into the Utah Debate Commission had almost a plaintive quality about them, a sadness. Here's another one that comes from a young man, and this is Patrick in Harriman. Let me see. Mr. Owens, you will have the first 90-second opportunity. As a college student, I am concerned about rising tuition costs and the debt that students face to attend college. What's your plan to address this problem, and what do you believe is the federal government's role in assisting students who are interested and committed to pursuing higher education?
First of all, I want to keep student loans in place and available to people. Again, a big difference between me and my opponent on the availability of student loans and Pell Grants. 80% of Utah students are going through college with one of those forms of assistance. We can't pull the rug out from under those people. I do strongly believe that education is the best investment we can make in the future. It's the best thing we can work on as Democrats and Republicans together. It should be common ground without reasonable people being even able to disagree. I think that I support the governor's initiative, by the way, on 2020, where 66% of Utah students, the goal is to have them have higher ed degrees by 2020. We could not possibly make that goal if we did away with student loans and Pell Grants. I personally went through law school on student loans and Pell Grants. I had a mother who was a teacher. I had a father who was a public servant. I think my opponent as well benefited from student loans. I want to make sure those remain available for other people who can't afford education out of pocket. Having said that, we do need to figure out how to lower the cost of higher education. There's a great proposal out there that we take the senior year of high school, which a lot of kids don't use very well, and turn that into a free year of college. There's studies showing it wouldn't cost the state very much money to do that. We could make that the first year of a 2-year AB degree. But we've got to do better with education. There's a Standard & Poor's study out there that says if every American in the workforce had 1 year more of education, that the growth in our domestic product over the last 6 years since the recession would have been a ½ a point greater. This is the best thing we can do to help hardworking middle-class families and grow our economy.
Mia Love, what do you say to Patrick of Harriman, Utah?
Thank you. First of all, Patrick, I've never called to do away with student loans. Let's be clear about that. I am convinced that an unlimited flow of federal dollars into colleges has caused the price of the rate of tuition to rise far faster than the rate of inflation, making it very difficult for middle-income families and lower-income families to receive a higher education. I've taken student loans. I've paid them back. And I can tell you, I understand the pain of paying those back. The school that I went to was $20,000 a year. Today, without the benefit of a better education at the same institution, it's $44,000 a year. How long is it going to take for a student going to that college to pay back those student loans today? Better yet, those of us who are sending our kids to school in the next 5 to 10 years, will we be able to afford college tuition when it's $80,000 to $100,000? Now, I'm not the daughter of a congressman. I doubt that many of us are. But I can tell you right now, at this rate, higher education will become only available for the rich and the elite. And as a parent and a representative looking to represent this district, I cannot stand by and allow that to happen.
Mr. Owens, both of you seem to allude to the fact that it's controlling the expense of attending college, not just the availability of funds. So how do we control the expense of our higher education, which seems to be driven by market forces?
Well, I think I addressed one issue where I'd like to see experiments conducted. They have begun around the country to turn the senior year of high school into the first year of college. But I don't see how you can just pull the rug out from under people who need to pay for the expense right here and now before we figure out how to rein in those expenses. But I want to serve on the Education Committee. I am anxious to figure out ways to reduce those costs. But again, you need to keep it available. It's the single best thing we can do to help people better their situations and grow the economy.
Mia Love, you're 30 on the subject of market forces. How can you control them?
I think that if you are actually able to allow students or allow colleges to compete for students, that will help bring down the cost of tuition. I think that we need to stop federal government from taking over those college loans. One of the things that I allude to when I go and I speak to some of the businesses, they would love to get involved in education and making sure that they can help out with programs, help out with grants, and help out with some of the tuition costs so that they can get these skills that they need from students graduating from college.
Mia Love, you'll have the first 90-second opportunity this next question, and this comes from Jorge in Bountiful. Should there be a path to citizenship for undocumented residents? Do you think that undocumented people who speak English, have no criminal record, pay taxes, and have lived in the USA for more than 5 years should be able to get a permanent legal work permit? Mia Love, the first 90-second opportunity on immigration.
Thank you. First of all, I want everyone to know that I'm committed to immigration and legal immigration. I'm the daughter of parents who immigrated to this country. As a matter of fact, my father said that his proudest moment was when he became a U.S. citizen. He learned how to speak English. He studied American history and the American Constitution. And he said that not only, when he pledged his allegiance to the American flag, not only did he know exactly what he was saying, he meant every word of it. If we are going to fix legal immigration, there are 3 things we have to do. 1, we have to secure the borders, not just from illegal immigration, but from terrorism, weapons, drugs that may come into the country. We also have to track people, not just people who are coming into the country, but also people who are leaving the country, so that we know effectively exactly what we're dealing with. How about a system that allows people to pay a small fee to come into the country, and then they get the majority of that fee back? And last but not least, it is Congress's job to create a uniform rule of naturalization. Under Article 1, Section 8, it is our job to make sure that we have a front door in and we close the back door. In order for us to fix it and give people opportunities, whether they want to become citizens or want to have just legal status, we've got to fix those 3 first.
Doug Owens, your opportunity, and Jorge's point is, what should be the pathway for someone who's here who wants to contribute?
Let me address that in 1 second. I want to add one thing. One important thing about these debates is to understand where the candidates are on their positions on issues, to get below the 30-second commercial or the tagline. I have made a reference to my opponent's position on student loans. I hope people will look that up. I think it's abundantly clear. On the subject of immigration, I support compassionate and fair reform on immigration. Senator Hatch voted for legislation recently, sensible bipartisan legislation that came out of the Senate. I support that legislation of that kind. First of all, it secures the border. We need to have a secure border. I strongly feel we should not have an illegal immigration process. We should only have a legal immigration process. We also have a serious issue with drug trafficking that I think a better controlled border can do a lot to address. And I hope we get to talk about Ebola, because I think there's another very serious border issue on that issue. But I do think that we do have an issue with 11.5 million undocumented people. We're beginning to have the makings of an underclass in our society. That's not the American way to have that. It hurts our economy because they can't be full participants in it. They can't access education the way I would like them to. So I would favor a system that's, again, in this legislation that was voted out by the Senate, that allows people to pay a fine, get square with the law, and in appropriate cases have a pathway to citizenship.
Mia Love, you have a 30-second rebuttal opportunity.
This is an area where we can show our compassion as Americans and make sure that we fix the problem permanently instead of Band-Aid solutions that cause more families more heartache. Again, if we fix it permanently, we would make sure that families don't have to go through some of the difficult situations that they're going through and that they don't know where to go right now. And I find it interesting that my opponent claims he wants to end the dysfunction, yet with the other hand, he does everything he can to attack. So I just want you to know that I think you have a choice in what you want to do, whether you want to have somebody who's going to attack it or have somebody who's going to find solutions for problems.
And you both will have summation time, but right now, Mr. Owens, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
I don't think it's an attack to point out differences on issues. I have high respect for my opponent. Anybody who would throw their hat in the ring, absolutely have high respect, and you will never hear a personal comment from me. But I do feel it incumbent upon me to point out differences on issues. These are some of these are extreme issues that do not reflect, I think, Utah values. On immigration, this is an example of congressional dysfunction. Community, civic, and religious leaders are calling for reform. Congress can't get itself together to do it. We need to return that control to sensible people who will work on a bipartisan basis to move the country forward.
I promised an opportunity to return to a theme that you'd each addressed in your own comments. That's the Affordable Care Act, 2,100 pages of existing controversy in some people's opinions. It is the law of the land. So with that said, give me a specific element of the Affordable Care Act that you take substantial issue with. And if you find a part that is worthy of your praise, can you identify what is one of the upsides of the Affordable Care Act? Assuming that you can identify one. Mia Love, I'm going to give you Mr. Owens, I'm going to give you the first 90-second opportunity to more fully explain your sense of the Affordable Care Act.
You know, it's really lamentable that we had a major piece of legislation that rushed through Congress on a one-party basis. Every great change in the history of this republic has come with a bipartisan effort. We did not get the benefits of both parties. We're in a situation where we need the benefit of both parties' best efforts. So there are things that, first of all, I think it is a futile effort to continue to call for the repeal of Obamacare. That's not realistic anymore. I think the shutdown last fall to defund it simply polarized the debate and actually move the ball backward on getting reform in place on the things we need. I mentioned earlier I do not like tying the provision of health insurance to employment. I think that's a big mistake. I told you I personally have met with businesses who cut employees' hours in order to not have to meet that mandate. There's another thing that hits Utah unusually hard in there, the 2.3% tax on sales of medical devices. We have a big medical device industry in Utah. We need to cut that. I personally am upset that Harry Reid would refuse to keep that an amendment to that provision out of some tax reform legislation in the Senate earlier this year. So I'd like to see that repealed. There are some things that we like in it, right? The fact that it allows parents to keep their children on their insurance policies later in life. The fact that people can't be denied based on pre-existing conditions. So to me, as somebody who's interested in pragmatic solutions, it seems obvious. Let's just go to work, keep the parts we like, and work on what we don't like on a bipartisan basis and not have a polarized dialogue such as emerged after the shutdown last fall.
Mia Love, your sharpest criticism of the Affordable Care Act and a spot that you might praise that you see the merits.
Well, first of all, the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, is not affordable, and it's certainly not sustainable, and that's the biggest problem that I have with it. It was meant to put as many people on insurance and provide as much people with insurance as possible. However, we have fewer people insured today than we did before the Affordable Care Act came into law. So I actually got an email from a lady from West Jordan that talked to me about getting kicked off of her insurance and had to be forced onto the exchange. She was elated to find out that her costs were going to be $134 a month, and then was dismayed at the fact that her deductible was $6,300 and realized she wouldn't be able to afford to go to the doctor. Now, I think we do need to repeal Obamacare, but more importantly, we need to know exactly what we're going to replace it with. And my plan takes a three-pronged approach to reducing costs, improving outcomes, and improving patient experience. In order for us to do that, we need to make sure that we allow people to buy insurance across state lines. We want to remove the Berlin Wall called the federal government and put the decision-making back in the hands of patients and doctors. We need to apply broad, free market reforms to health care. We want portability. We want to be able to align the incentives with the outcome. If we are able to do all of these things, we'll be able to bring the costs down and effectively give as many people access to health care as possible.
Doug Owens, your opportunity for rebuttal.
Well, I do think, again, we need to roll up our sleeves and go to work on a bipartisan basis to fix this thing. And again, we had the polarization that resulted from the shutdown, I think, ended any discussion of reforming it. It's really lamentable. There's many other provisions in it that we need to fix. I talk to my wife about this all the time. There are mandates of goals. There are mandates on outcomes and processes rather than just a goal. I believe strongly that we can leave it up to medicine to govern itself if we set those goals. And we do need to address affordability, which is another aspect that the Obamacare did not address adequately.
Mia Love, your 30-second opportunity.
Well, first of all, also, I agree that we need to remove the medical device tax. It's killing jobs and it's costing way too much. And I want to just address this notion of extreme. I believe that extreme is $17 trillion of debt and no plan to fix it. Extreme is the hijacking of 20% of our economy through the passage of Obamacare without bipartisan support. Extreme is ignoring the rising cost of tuition and attacking your opponent for trying to find solutions. Utah finds these issues to be extreme, and I agree.
Well, let me take you to one of the more bucolic, beautiful corners of the 4th Congressional District, the town of Spring City. This question comes from Carl, who lives in Spring City. He says the Narrows Project in central Utah is a project that's important to the residents of North Sanpete County. Please tell me what your position is on the Narrows Project. He gave me a long explanation to describe it in case anybody needs that. Tell me what you would do in Congress to advance or kill the Narrows Project. And I believe, Mia Love, you have the first 90-second opportunity.
Well, I can tell you why it's such a long explanation. It's because they've been fighting this for over 90 years. It's a long time to fight for this project. And I was just in Sanpete County recently, and I find it very sad that you've got cities that do not have water for farming. They don't even have water for drinking. They're actually rationing out their water, and I find it very disheartening. This project was held, the Narrows Project, by the way, was held up in Congress for the past few years, and it actually started up again, and now they're having some problems with the environmental process. I think that we need to do everything we can to support these projects. Understand that water, as a mayor, water and transportation is a lifeline to any city. If you do not have water or transportation, you cannot thrive, you cannot continue to grow. And so I wholeheartedly support the Narrows Project. And not only am I going to help get that project through, I'm going to do everything I can to expedite that project.
Doug Owens, your opportunity to speak to the Narrows Project and the good folks of Spring City.
It is a bucolic corner of the district, as you mentioned, and I visited there several times in the course of this race. I support the Narrows Project. It's time to get that water turned around from Carbon County into North Sanpete. You know, this is, again, a function of Congress that's not being fulfilled. And I'll just mention again, my father, Wayne Owens, was heavily involved in Utah water projects. I love the details of a legal issue. I think I am well suited to get into that, to help all the stakeholders come together and work on a solution and get things through Congress that have been stuck forever. Even things that we couldn't disagree on, obvious things that reasonable minds couldn't differ on, we do not get through Congress anymore. So it's broken, and I want to fix it. It's in my nature to help bring differing parties together. A good example of that was Jim Matheson working with Senator Bob Bennett, on the Washington County Wilderness Bill, where they, over years, period of years, brought stakeholders together, got a sensible compromise about what parts of Washington County should be preserved and what could be used for more exploitative uses. So I think that we can, it depends on your native outlook. I have a native outlook that puts party as a very distant second consideration, that puts the interests of Utah hardworking families first, and I'm going to go to work on those pragmatic solutions that we need on the Narrows Dam and everything else.
Let me exercise my moderator's prerogative, do a follow-up and give you each 1 minute. If it's built in my district, it's critical infrastructure. But if it's built in your state, it's pork barrel politics. How do you differentiate between the proper appropriation of federal dollars to benefit your district as opposed to weighing the cost and benefit ratio in other locales? Mia Love, how do you draw that distinction?
Well, I can tell you that I can draw directly from my experience. In Saratoga Springs, there are many projects that we had made sure that we put on a priority level, and we found that there were funds that were coming back from our taxpayer dollars, and those funds were going to a specific project that federal government wanted to put in, and the same project that would cost us $260,000 cost over $1 million for the federal government to come in and put in that project. Now, here's what I would like as a mayor, a former mayor, and as I speak to these mayors across the district, they want to be able to be, they want to get rid of the handcuffs. It's what government is stopping them from doing. It's the government stopping them from addressing the issues that their constituents want. As I go throughout the entire district, they have all specific issues, and they can tie one issue to something that is hurting their city. And that's what I want to make sure I remove.
And Doug Owens, your opportunity to make that differentiation between investing in the public good and investing too much.
Well, I think it's part of the role of a congressman to look out for his or her district. I think that's, I favor investment in public transportation, for example. There's an important initiative to fund a tracks extension down through the south end of Salt Lake County. I support that. I'll go to work on issues that will invest in business and growth in my district. But I think you also need to have the public interest, the larger public interest, the national interest at heart, and not engage in things that are wasteful. You know, sometimes, again, this is a symptom of congressional dysfunction, where we see Congress has to punt its function sometimes to nonpartisan commissions to come up, for example, with military base closures, because Congress can't extricate itself enough from the decisions. Sometimes that makes sense to do that. I would rather see members of Congress be responsible, be willing to lose elections if their best judgment is not adequate for the district, if a member can't explain that to his district. But I do think there's a larger public duty to be taken into account. But part of being a member of Congress is helping your specific district with investments in the future.
Our final question tonight, which Mr. Owens, you'll respond to first in 90 seconds, turns on the realm of national security and surveillance and what is appropriate. The question comes in several parts. I'll see how much we can get in. To begin with, what's your view on the National Security Agency's surveillance activities? Would you support a law that prohibits mobile phone manufacturers from producing phones that cannot be easily monitored by NSA surveillance programs? Should the government be able to listen in?
As an attorney, I certainly appreciate the liberties that are enshrined in the Constitution, and I've litigated many of them. I think that the NSA should be entitled to surveil citizens if they get a requisite warrant. That's what the prerequisite in the Fourth Amendment for searches and seizures. So I support that. I don't know that making a cell phone that could never be surveilled would be consistent with the need for government, if a proper warrant is obtained, to go after, surveil a particular cell phone. So I don't think I would support that legislation.
Mia Love, your opportunity on the role of the government being able to conduct surveillance.
I cannot support it. I do believe that if you're willing, I think one of our forefathers mentioned this, if you're willing to give up freedom in the name of security, you're worthy of neither. And I want you to know that the thing that makes this country great is the ability for people to make decisions, for them to be able to have their privacy, so that they, without the government coming in and listening in on their conversation. I think privacy is incredibly important. Now, I think that if there is clear evidence where there is someone who is maybe threatening the lives of Americans, I think that it's important for us to be proactive. But when it comes to the privacy of every individual, we need to make sure that we protect that. I'm going to protect those individual rights and every other right that's enshrined in the Constitution.
Well, our questioner had a distinct follow-up, and so I'm going to offer it to you, and I'll give you at least 30 seconds and maybe up to a minute. Do you consider Edward Snowden, then, a hero or traitor? And why do you think that? Snowden, of course, the American computer professional with an employment history at the CIA who released classified informations about international surveillance programs involving the United States. He's currently in temporary residence status in Russia. Mr. Owens, Edward Snowden, hero or traitor?
Well, according to the accounts I've read, he has committed crimes. He has released government secrets to the public. I understand it's endangered particular individuals. So I don't want to use harsh terms, but he certainly sounds like the accusation is that he has committed crimes against the country.
Mia Love, your opinion on the specific case of the high-profile case of Mr. Snowden.
I think one of the things that's unfortunate is there are many Americans that do not have trust in the government. The trust in the administration is not there, so it's hard to differentiate which information we're given is true and which isn't true. It's very difficult when you don't have a transparent government. But I would say that I certainly hope that if this person is just, if Edward is just a whistleblower, that he is not having, we would be able to protect his rights and be able to bring him back home. I certainly hope that we would be able to protect his individual rights as an American citizen.
As frequently happens in live television, we've fallen into a gray area right now. Not enough time for another question, but perhaps enough time to extend your closing comments. So rather than just 1 minute, I'm going to extend to each of you a 90-second opportunity for your closing statement. Prior to airtime, it was determined that Doug Owens would have the first opportunity, and that opportunity, Mr. Owens, is in fact 90 seconds in length.
Well, thank you. Thank you for tuning in tonight and getting informed about the election. It has been a great privilege to go out on the campaign trail and to get acquainted with so many fine people, to hear about their aspirations and hopes for the future of our state and country. You know, we have inherited a great country. It's incumbent upon us to build on those founding principles that we've got. But that's too hard because of congressional dysfunction. And I want to go to work to fix that issue. I want to end the gridlock in Washington. I'll go to work in Washington and work with both parties to get things done for Utah. I think we've got to get Congress working again in a way that works for all of us, in common sense, bipartisan solutions. Utah needs a representative who's going to go to Washington and put Utah first, not to go vote a party line. I'll seek out the best the best that each party has and be willing to take those ideas no matter where I find them. I think strongly that we've got to have a sense of humility when we converse with the other side, take into account different viewpoints, and be willing to find those common sense solutions and bridge those gaps between those who have different viewpoints but are still nevertheless trying to address the issues that are hitting us every day, like the maintenance of Social Security, reforming Obamacare, and reforming immigration. I hope that as an independent voice, in Washington, I feel that I will be better suited to find those solutions and help people work together and change the attitude in Congress. I'm not interested to go play by the rules. I want to change the rules that are played there. I'll be a strong and independent voice for Utah's hardworking middle-class families.
And our final 90-second opportunity to Mia Love.
Thank you. Do I believe that we have an obligation to care for those who cannot care for themselves? Yes, I do. Do I believe that if we have the resources to end our neighbor's suffering, we should do that? Absolutely. But I also believe that if we need a federal government to force us to do what we already know we should do, is the day that we're not deserving of the title American. This is a great country conceived in liberty and American exceptionalism, where people all over the world are still willing to risk their lives to come to. Now, we have an opportunity to do something very special here in the state of Utah, to represent Utah's voice and to bring people to come along with us. I'm not going to Washington to be one of 435. I'm going to Washington to make sure that I represent your values and bring people to come along with us. Now, this is not about who I'm running against. This is about what we're running for. We are running for our children's way of life. We're running for freedom. We're running for our state. We're running for the ability to make decisions in our homes. I'm not asking you to trust Washington. I'm going to Washington to tell them to trust you again. I believe that this is a great state and we can be a great example in this state, and I'm asking for your support in representing our values. I'm asking for your vote on November 4th. May God bless you, may God bless Utah, and may God bless our still independent United States of America.
My thanks to Mia Love and Doug Owens for their time this evening. Special appreciation to the University of Utah for their support. And since this is the final debate in the series produced by the Utah Debate Commission, it's appropriate to thank all of the media partners in television, print, and radio for bringing their support to these public debates. There's a long list of people behind the scenes who have labored to bring life to these public debates, specifically former Governor Olene Walker, former Senator Bob Bennett, former candidate and debate advocate Scott Howe. They all played important roles, none more important than the work of Utah Debate Commission Executive Director Nina Sliding. The Utah Debate Commission reminds you Election Day is Tuesday, November 4th. In Salt Lake City, I'm Ken Verdoya. Good evening.